Everything just feels so confusing most of the time. Hi, my name is Sydney. Welcome back to the Thunderdome. And before we launch in, this video is sponsored by your new daddy, Grounds News. And side note, I would really love it and appreciate it if you guys went and subscribed to my email list on my website, which is in the description. The link is there, because you never know, I might get yeeted from YouTube, and that would be really sad. When I originally decided to cover this topic, it was after Cardi B had performed her song WAP, or WAP, I guess, at the Grammys. An award show I don't think anyone watches anymore. And a song that leaves very little to the imagination. A perfect match. Being that Cardi was wearing little clothing and on stage she was twerking, or whatever this is, political commentators like Candace Owens likened this to the destruction of our culture. The destruction of my taste buds.
Virtually what we were looking at last night was a lesbian sex scene being simulated on television, and this is considered feminist. It's iconic, it's forward, it's progressive, it's the way the world's going, Tucker, and if you don't see that, it's because you're a bigot. You don't understand. This is the way the world needs to go. I 100% agree with you in the assessment that this feels more sinister. This is starting to me to seem like it's not even left or right. It's not a political issue. This seems like an attack on American values, American traditions, and you're actually actively trying to make children aspire to things that are grotesque. This is not about diversity anymore, Tucker. It's about perversity. No. We are celebrating perversity in America.
But if we're being honest, this isn't anything we haven't seen before. People took exception to Nicki Minaj's video clip Anaconda back in 2014. They took exception to the Super Bowl halftime show performed by J-Lo and Shakira in 2020. And Miley Cyrus's whole adult career has just been one giant half-naked troll. Is this the cultural Marxism I hear so much about? Jordan Peterson, where are you when I need you? Now, whether you sit on the left, the right, or in the center, or you just like half-naked women, I guess, your reaction to the Grammys probably will have been wildly different. On one hand, you have CNN describing this as gloriously twerking, owning the stage in Barbarella-esque outfits, referencing female empowerment, sexual pride, and delivering, undoubtedly, one of the most memorable Grammy performances of all time. Gloriously twerking. Well, that's a combination of words I never want to hear again. And on the other, you have people like Tucker Carlson saying that it's hard not to conclude that they're intentionally trying to degrade our culture and hurt our children. But what I find interesting is how people on the left predominantly and some feminists seem to view this performance as female empowerment. In fact, the song WAP as a general rule is viewed by some as a feminist anthem.
Because it is about ownership of body and ownership of sexuality. Sometimes I feel like when you are a rapper that does that, either people assume that it was put onto you by men, which it wasn't.
You sure about that, friend? Kinda looks like the majority of people who wrote and produced this song were men. Are these really the lyrics of a feminist anthem? I don't know. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the lie of female empowerment, an idea that seems more deeply rooted in the objectification and degradation of women rather than our actual progression and success. But before I press on and ruin your day, no doubt, let's hear from your new daddy, Ground News. We live in a time where things are very partisan. Left or right, liberal or conservative, people in the middle must feel very left out. But that's why Ground News is a really important app and website for news and current affairs, and one that I personally really like to use. Ground News is a news comparison platform that shows how outlets from across the political spectrum are covering the same story. The cool thing about this is it lets you see how much a story is receiving balanced coverage, how the story has progressed over time, and from where in the world it originated. Which helps you identify biases, but also helps you track the mainstream media's lies. Ground News gives you side-by-side comparisons of where outlets fall in their political leanings and biases. I also think it's important to note that you're not going to agree with all the bias ratings for outlets, which is fine for those of us who have an opinion on everything, because Ground News takes into consideration audience ratings themselves and then updates outlets accordingly. Ground News is a great step towards impartial news. So click the link in the description to download the Ground News app for free for your enjoyment and news-iness. Now, female empowerment can mean all kinds of things to all kinds of people. Given that there's no universal meaning for it, it mostly revolves around women being provided the power and opportunities to participate in social, economic, political, and educational spaces. Think of it as giving a woman the tools and confidence to start a business. Or letting a Sydney buy a gun. And this is more or less in line with the interests of feminists in the 1960s and 70s, who wanted women to be more than housewives and mothers, to pursue higher education or chase career objectives. Part of this movement gave way to the sexual revolution, which gave us casual sex, the contraceptive pill, and abortion on demand. And somewhere between then and now, we ended up with a hypersexualized society that equates objectification to empowerment. Wonderful. On the daily, we're bombarded with images of half-naked women. We see articles about how everything from abortion to porn is empowering for women. We're exposed to music that talks about men degrading women or women embracing their sexuality. Most influencers on social media post half-naked photos, which honestly always seem to be on my Instagram Explore page, and I don't even know why. I don't click them. I want pictures of dogs and probably shoes and maybe even nail polish. And maybe wedding rings and wedding dresses and plants. I love plants. Did you hit your head earlier? And mugs and carpets and sightseeing and Scotland. Something especially interesting about this topic for me is that a lot of women act like they self-objectify for their own interests. Take, for example, websites like OnlyFans, paid subscription services where women can sell nude and lewd content. And as we've already talked about on this channel, a lot of people view this as capitalism at play. They view these websites as the individual's choice, that women particularly can take control of their bodies through business, while people on the other side of the argument say that this exemplifies the very problem with female empowerment in the modern age. A good recent example of this is Bad Baby, also known as the Cash Me Outside girl from Dr. Phil, as some of you might know her. Effectively, as soon as she turned 18, she announced that she'd started an OnlyFans. And I don't know, guys, that feels almost not legal. Probably not okay. Still a child. And what's more concerning about this is how she claims to have made $1 million in the 6 hours following her launch. Buying images of teenagers just as they turn 18. Wood chipper. This sort of thing is becoming increasingly normal, especially for young women. But on the other side of things, there's an argument that this sexualization is centered around male attention and societal validation. I think the kids call that a self-own. In 2005, Canada's Maclean's magazine published an op-ed called Girls Gone Ranch. The article confirms that young women and teenagers equate female empowerment with self-objectification and degradation, giving all sorts of examples from Girls Gone Wild to cable shows like G-String Divas, where stripping is equated to female empowerment. Ariel Levy, who happens to have the name of a mermaid, the author whose research is covered in this article, observed that girls everywhere do their best to be the skankiest they can, trying to look as slutty, willing, and wanton as possible. Snapping their thongs, and no, Australians, we're not talking about flip-flops here, and baring their cleavages, these girls had astoundingly gone any sexist male one step better. They were treating themselves and each other like pieces of meat. If anything, admits Levy, women caught up in the liberating aspects of raunch think of men as superior. Over and over again, these women are telling me they want to be like a guy. It's really fascinating. It's fetishizing masculinity in the sense that maleness in this equation means smart, funny, capable, brave, sexually adventurous, all of that. It's sort of funny in a way how society and even feminism tends to uphold male characteristics as empowering or the ultimate objective, while simultaneously downplaying traditional female roles that they once said were oppressive. Like raising tiny pudding people. Why are we regressing? Another component that Levy and other researchers have observed is that being sexy makes you more popular. Can't relate. One example of this comes from research in 2012 where a group of 6 to 9-year-olds were given a choice between a doll in sexy clothes and a doll in trendy loose-fitting clothes. The girls were then asked which doll looked like them, looked how they wanted to look, was the popular girl in school, and the doll they wanted to play with. 68% of the girls said the sexy doll looked how they wanted to look, and 72% said she was more popular than the non-sexy doll. The researchers noted that other studies have found that sexiness boosts popularity among girls but not boys. Although the desire to be popular is not uniquely female, the pressure to be sexy in order to be popular is. Well, at least it makes sense why I had like one friend in high school. Now, if you're wondering how we got here, you can thank a myriad of things for it, including, but not limited to, the gradual sexualization of society. And probably one of the prevailing ideas of feminist theory called sex-positive feminism. The idea that in order for women to be liberated and empowered, they must be not only openly sexual, but embrace their sexuality. This plays out when women embrace sex work, from prostitution to stripping, suggesting this is empowering. Porn, casual sex, being open about their use of sex toys and the amount of sexual partners they've had, and so on. And at the same time, there is a competing traditional feminist idea that says the objectification of women and their bodies is bad. Objectification is a notion central to feminist theory. It can be roughly defined as seeing and/or treating a person, usually a woman, as an object, where she is viewed only as a body, body parts, or for her sexual function. And we've heard time and time again how this objectification plays out, driving sexism, oppression, sexual harassment, and even violence. But it's hard, at least for me, to not view these things as two completely conflicting ideas. Which brings me to the point that sex-positive empowerment is not about women at all. A TED Talk from 2013 discusses the sexualized images of women in advertising and the effects of self-objectification. She argues that 96% of the sexualized images that we see are of women, and this is especially true in advertising. A study from 1983 to 2003 said that the percentage of ads using sex to sell products rose from 15% to 27%. And that was 20 years ago. Oh my God, that was 20 years ago. What is even happening? I am aged. But what's interesting is that this kind of advertising doesn't even appeal to women. A study from 2006 demonstrated that the more seductive the model, the more uninterested women are, preferring images of sophisticated women over the former.
But beyond that, this idea that sex sells, I'd like to challenge that directly, because the fact is, if sex sold, most women are heterosexual, and we are sexual beings, so why wouldn't we see half-naked men everywhere in advertising? I would like to propose that something else is being sold here. To men, they're being sold this idea constantly that they are sexual subjects. They are in the driver's seat. It makes them feel powerful to see images of objectified women everywhere. And for women, we are being sold this idea that this is how we get our value and this is the way to become the ideal sex object, which is why instead of sex selling, these ideas of subjectivity and objectivity are being sold. So we see men's magazines with scantily clad women, and we see women's magazines with scantily clad women.
Heldman goes on to talk about the effects of self-objectification, where women themselves place their value in how sexualized they are. And there is a body of research about how damaging this is. HuffPost argues that the way women are commonly portrayed in music videos, films, and advertising is not just disrespectful and sexist, it's at the root of a mental health crisis. It leads to eating disorders, lack of self-esteem, anxiety around women's bodies, and not unsurprisingly, self-objectification has been correlated with decreased sexual health among adolescent girls, measured by decreased condom use and diminished sexual assertiveness.
Teens engaged with high levels of media with sexual content are twice as likely to become sexually active before they turn 16, and twice as likely to experience pregnancy in the next 3 years.
And women now are less happy than they've been in days gone by. Even though we have all the things, but maybe we don't want all of the things. Maybe we want a husband, and dogs, and country music, and a nice house in the middle of nowhere. You're literally just describing things that you want. Shut up. You're not even my real dad. Now, in 1997, a team of researchers recruited men and women for an experiment. They had participants either wear a swimsuit or a sweater and then carry out a few tasks, like eating cookies, for example, or carrying out a math test in a room by themselves with no observers, completely alone. The men wearing swimsuits did slightly better than those wearing the sweaters, but the women, Oh, the women. The women wearing the swimsuits did significantly worse than those wearing the sweaters. The women also restrained themselves when it came to eating cookies, leading the researchers to conclude that women perform worse and restrain themselves when they are self-objectifying. Side note, imagine participating in this study and having someone ask you what you do for it and you're just like, eating cookies? Anyway, Heldman talks about habitual body checking as well.
First, the more we think of ourselves and internalize this idea of being sex objects, the higher our rates of depression. We also engage in habitual body monitoring much more when we view ourselves as sex objects. What is habitual body monitoring? The men in the audience, this might be news to you. It is not news to the women in the audience. We think about the positioning of our legs, the positioning of our hair, where the light is falling, who's looking at us, who's not looking at us. In fact, in the 5 minutes that I've been giving this talk, on average, the women in this audience have engaged in habitual body monitoring 10 times. That is every 30 seconds.
All of this was also confirmed by a study by the American Psychological Association in 2007. You know, the same APA that said that traditional masculinity is bad. That APA. They argued that the sexualization and objectification of women has the same aforementioned negative consequences. It also said that these are the models of femininity presented for young girls to study and emulate. And study and emulate them they do. Please stop this. In saying all of this too, there is some research that says that self-objectification in some cases can make women actually feel better about themselves, which is nice. But it also makes women feel horrible about themselves, so take from that what you will. In my opinion, what we're seeing is the glorification of sexual exploitation and self-objectification under the guise of female empowerment. And worse than that, feminists have long argued that men sexualize and objectify women. But today, women are effectively doing that job for them. It's not my favorite. This objectification disguised as empowerment is why we end up with movies like Cuties. Toddlers and tiaras, twerking women and girls dancing to WAP like this is somehow attractive to anyone. You know what? On second thought, I'm sure it actually is. But I personally hate it. I hate modern dancing so much. If you hadn't already guessed, my overall point here is that being hypersexualized and this hypersexualization that's happening to society, even in the eyes of some feminist groups, is not empowering. And overall, it has more negative consequences for women than good. Yes, that's correct. Even some of our friends over at Feminist Island think this is a trash idea. We finally agree on something. But I do want to add here that being sexy is not a bad thing. And playing up your sexuality, taking control of being an attractive human being is not a bad thing. That's not what I'm trying to get across here at all. More than anything, I think that we've taken it way too far. And usually I find most arguments about modesty to be equally as annoying as arguments about why twerking is female empowerment. Everything is dumb, and I need a nap. I am completely partial to sexiness and attractiveness and sensualness in the right time and place, for sure. And frankly, when I was younger, I definitely fell into the trap of thinking that fewer clothes or sexiness was a precursor to self-esteem and validation and yada yada. I have been there and I won't pretend that I haven't, but I definitely grew up and I definitely learned from it. But I think, at least in my opinion, it's fairly clear that there are better ways to seek and chase empowerment. And I think in the end, this lie of female empowerment will continue to be a net negative in society, making us feel worse when it's supposed to be making us feel better. And maybe we have nobody to blame for that but ourselves. Now, before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder that you can download Ground News using the link in the description. The app is free, you can use it immediately, and go on and enjoy the news. Now, I open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Is female empowerment by today's standards actually predicated on hypersexualization? If it is, do you think that this is degrading? Do you think that it's beneficial for women? Do you think that feminism has taken things too far or not quite far enough? And what do you generally make of this issue overall? As always, if you like the video, hit subscribe and the thumbs up button. If you want to leave a comment, free to do so, just be respectful about it. And I will see you guys next time.